Stop recording video. Button.
Standing at the edge of the crowd, I saw Jen. She looked pale and stressed under the bright lights of the hangar. Guys were still walking into the hangar when she saw Ali. He smiled at her, and she started crying. A couple of the SEALs put their arms around her and walked her over to the edge of the group to look at the body, which surprised me. A few days before in the chow hall, Jen had told me she didn't want to see bin Laden's body. "I have no interest in seeing it," she told me. "My job description doesn't include having to look at a dead body." I was sure this was some sort of bravado. She didn't have to get dirty in her line of work. She wore expensive high heels, and she didn't worry about carrying dead weight to a waiting helicopter. She'd beaten bin Laden on an intellectual level. "If we pull this off," I had told her from across the table, "you've got to see the body." Back in the hangar, Jen stayed on the perimeter of the crowd. She didn't say anything, but I knew from her reaction she could see bin Laden's body on the floor. With tears rolling down her cheeks, I could tell it was taking a while for Jen to process. She'd spent half a decade tracking this man, and now there he was at her feet. It was easier for us. We saw dead bodies all the time. It was the kind of ugly we lived with, and we spent no time thinking about once it was finished. We were not jaded warmongers, but if you've seen one dead body, you've seen them all. People at Jen's level never had to deal with the blood. So to finally see bin Laden's body at her feet must have been jarring. I wandered away from the crowd. Leaning against the truck, I set down my rifle on the tailgate and stuffed my gloves into one of my cargo pockets. Most of the guys were back now and coming into the hangar. There were a lot of smiles. Teddy was one of the last guys to walk into the hangar. I could tell by his face he was mad and maybe even a little embarrassed by the helicopter crash. I intercepted him as he walked into the hangar and gave him a crushing bear hug. "Teddy," I said, "you're the heat." He gave me a sheepish smile and tried to wiggle out of my grip. "Dude, seriously," I said. I know for a fact he kept the mission on track by ditching the way he did. Everybody was focused on who pulled the trigger, but it was a lot harder to land a crashing helicopter than it was for any of us to pull the trigger. One wrong move, and we all would have been in a pile of debris in the courtyard. Teddy saved all of our lives. "Strong work," Walt said, giving me a handshake that turned into a hug. For the next few minutes, we all rotated around, congratulating one another. People were still coming into the hangar. I don't remember who I talked to as much as I do how it felt to be back safe. It didn't take long for the shit-talking to start. "Blow up the house? Really?" I heard Charlie say to the EOD guy. Eventually, we got together for a few posed pictures. We were one big team. As soon as the picture-taking ended, we all went back into work mode. Our 5 minutes of fun was over, and it was time to get to Bagram to get the intelligence processed. The Rangers had already packed up the body and were on their way to Bagram. We were following close behind in another plane. On the flight line, we loaded all our gear and strapped it down to the deck of the C-130. We walked on board still wearing our kit and carrying our weapons. There were few seats, so I found a spot near the front of the plane and sat down. Nearby, I could see Jen sobbing. She was sitting on the floor, hugging her legs to her chest in the fetal position. I could just make out her eyes in the red light of the cabin. They were puffy, and she seemed to be staring into the distance. I got up and tapped her on the shoulder. "Hey, it was 100%, I said, leaning close so she could hear over the roar of the engines. She looked at me in a daze. "Seriously, no shit," I said. "It was 100%. She nodded this time and started crying again. I scrambled back to my seat on the floor as the aircrew shut the cabin lights off. Minutes later, we were airborne and headed to Bagram.